Remember the 1980s? That glorious decade when Britain thought it could revolutionise everything from transport to cheese-making. Today we're diving into 21 British innovations from the 1980s that failed spectacularly, leaving behind a trail of broken dreams and empty wallets. Picture this. Sir Clive Sinclair genuinely believed we'd all be zipping around in plastic tricycles by 1990. But here's the twist. These failures weren't just embarrassing flops, they were ambitious moonshots that helped shape the technology we use today. Each spectacular disaster taught us invaluable lessons about design, marketing, and the brutal reality that being first doesn't mean being best. The Sinclair C5. If there's one image that perfectly captures British innovation gone wrong, it's Sir Clive Sinclair's electric tricycle that looked like a cross between a pedal car and a coffin on wheels, launched on January 10th, 1985 at Alexandra Palace with massive fanfare. This battery-powered vehicle was supposed to revolutionise urban transport. Instead, it became the punchline to every joke about failed inventions for the next 3 decades. The C5 featured a top speed of 15 miles per hour, which sounds reasonable until you realise you'd be sitting at exhaust pipe height surrounded by lorries doing 60. The polypropylene body was actually quite advanced for its time, manufactured by Hoover, yes, the vacuum cleaner company, in their Merthyr Tydfil factory. Here's something most people don't know. The vehicle's electric motor was designed by Polymotor in Italy and was surprisingly efficient, offering about 20 miles of range on a single charge. The problem wasn't the technology, it was everything else. The seating position put you lower than most car bumpers, meaning visibility was terrible both for you and other drivers. There were no doors, no roof, and minimal weather protection, hardly ideal for British weather. The steering was done via handlebars underneath the seat, which meant your arms would go numb after about 10 minutes. Sir Clive had envisioned commuters happily gliding to work, but what he created was essentially an expensive way to get pneumonia while terrifying other road users. Speaking of terrifying road users, wait until you hear about the television format war that cost British manufacturers billions. That's coming up after we explore how BSB's innovative satellite dishes became expensive bird baths. British satellite broadcasting was supposed to be the future of television, armed with cutting-edge technology and that iconic square satellite dish they called the Squarial. Launched on March 25th, 1990 on cable and April 29th on satellite after years of development and £500 million of investment, BSB had everything going for it. Official government backing, superior DMAC transmission technology that offered better picture quality than Sky's PAL system, and 5 dedicated channels including Galaxy Entertainment and the Power Station for Music. The Squarial itself was genuinely groundbreaking, a flat, diamond-shaped receiving antenna that could be mounted flush against a wall, making it far more aesthetically pleasing than Sky's round dishes. Developed by Fortel and manufactured by GEC Marconi, it used phased array technology that was decades ahead of its time. In fact, the technology behind the Squarial would later influence modern flat panel antennas used in military applications. But here's where it gets interesting. BSB spent so long perfecting their technology that Rupert Murdoch's Sky Television launched first on February 5, 1989, grabbing all the early adopters. BSB's receivers cost £350, about £900 in today's money, while Sky was practically giving theirs away. Within 9 months of launch, BSB had burned through their entire budget and merged with Sky on November 2, 1990 to form BSKYB, essentially a takeover that saw all that superior technology binned. The Squarials ended up in skips across Britain, and the DMAC standard died with them. Right, let's address the elephant in the room. Or should I say the gull-wing doors in the factory? The DeLorean DMC-12 wasn't technically a British innovation, but when you build approximately 9,000 cars in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland, with £100 million of British taxpayer money, we get to claim at least partial ownership of this magnificent disaster. John DeLorean convinced the British government that his stainless steel sports car would revitalise Northern Ireland's economy during the Troubles. The factory, built in record time, employed around 2,500 people and was supposed to produce 30,000 cars annually. Instead, they managed just over 9,000 before the company collapsed in 1982, amid drug trafficking charges against DeLorean. He was later acquitted, but the damage was done. The car itself was actually quite poorly received initially. The PRV, Peugeot Renault Volvo, V6 engine produced just 130 horsepower, making it slower than a contemporary Ford Capri, despite looking like it could travel through time. The unpainted stainless steel body showed every fingerprint and was impossible to repair without leaving obvious marks. The gullwing doors, while iconic, were prone to failure and made getting in and out in tight spaces virtually impossible. Quality control was abysmal. Workers later admitted to deliberately sabotaging cars due to poor working conditions. The irony? Back to the Future turned this failed British-built American dream into a cultural icon worth more today than it ever was new. Original cars now sell for £40,000 to £60,000, and there's even a company in Texas building new DeLoreans from remaining parts. While Sony's Betamax wasn't British invented, the UK market became one of the most dramatic battlegrounds in the format war, and British manufacturers picked the wrong horse disastrously. Companies like Ferguson, Rank and Sanyo UK went all in on Betamax, convinced that superior picture quality would win over consumers. Betamax genuinely was better. It offered superior resolution, better colour reproduction and more stable playback. Professional broadcasters used Betacam, Betamax's professional variant, well into the 2000s. But VHS tapes could record for 3 hours compared to Betamax's initial 1 hour. Perfect for recording films off the telly. JVC, who developed VHS, cleverly licensed their technology to anyone who wanted it, while Sony kept Betamax proprietary. By 1980, despite Betamax's technical advantages, VHS commanded 70% of the UK market. British retailers who'd invested heavily in Betamax stock watched their inventory become worthless. Dixons alone reportedly lost millions on unsold Betamax players. The final insult? Sony themselves started making VHS players in 1988. Fresh from his Zenith Spectrum success, Sir Clive decided in 1983 that what Britain really needed was a television you could fit in your pocket. The TV80 was a genuine marvel of miniaturization, a flat-screen TV using a side-mounted CRT that created a 2-inch diagonal picture you viewed through a magnifying lens. At £80, £300 today, it was prohibitively expensive for something that required perfect lighting conditions and gave you eye strain after 5 minutes. The aerial needed to be fully extended to receive anything, making you look like you were trying to contact aliens. Battery life was terrible. You get maybe an hour from expensive lithium batteries. Sony's Watchman, launched the same year, was bulkier but actually worked, condemning the TV80 to obscurity. Rabbit was Ferranti's answer to mobile communications, launching in 1989 with backing from Barclays, British Telecom and others. The concept was brilliantly simple: cheap handsets that worked within 100 yards of special base stations installed in shops, petrol stations and railway stations. You could make outgoing calls only, no receiving, but at 10 pence per minute it was far cheaper than early mobile phones. The technology was actually quite clever, using CT2, cordless telephone 2, digital technology that would later influence DECT standards still used today. But the system required massive infrastructure investment. Thousands of base stations needed installation. By the time enough were installed, proper mobile phones had become affordable. Rabbit hopped into liquidation in 1993, having attracted just 10,000 subscribers against a break-even target of 100,000. Now, before we dive into how British Telecom tried to create the internet before the internet was invented, here's something fascinating. Many of these failed innovations actually pioneered technologies we use daily now, the pattern recognition systems in the Sinclair QL. They influenced modern predictive text. The rabbit network architecture? It's basically how modern Wi-Fi calling works. Keep watching to discover how a BBC project about medieval England accidentally created the first multimedia encyclopedia disaster. And if you're a true Brit, hit that subscribe button. Imagine the internet, but uglier, slower, and charging you by the minute. That was Prestel, British Telecom's videotech service launched in 1979 and limping along until 1994. Using your television and a special adapter, you could access news, weather, and even primitive online banking through pages of blocky text and garish graph. The technology was genuinely innovative. Prestel pioneered online banking through Bank of Scotland, travel booking, and even had a primitive email system called Mailbox. But at £150 for the adapter plus call charges and page charges, some pages cost 50 pence to view, it was expensive entertainment. France's similar Minitel system succeeded because they gave away terminals. BT charged for everything. By 1983, Prestel had just 20,000 subscribers against projections of 450,000. The most successful part? Prestel's adult chat services, which allegedly accounted for 40% of all revenue. Not exactly what the post office engineers had envisioned when they developed the system. While Philips and MCA developed LaserDisc technology, Thorn EMI became its biggest British champion, convinced that superior picture quality would demolish VHS. They were monumentally wrong. LaserDiscs offered picture quality that wouldn't be matched until DVD arrived in 1997, plus features like frame-perfect freeze frame and chapter selection. But the discs were the size of vinyl records. Players cost £600, and you had to flip the disc halfway through most films. Thorn EMI created an entire division around LaserVision, even producing exclusive content. They lost millions when UK adoption peaked at just 1% of households. The technology lived on in arcade games and karaoke machines, cold comfort for Thorn EMI's shareholders. The Sinclair QL, Quantum Leap, was Sir Clive's attempt at a serious business computer, launched on January 12, 1984. It featured a Motorola 68008 processor, 128 kilobytes of RAM, and innovative microdrive storage systems using tiny tape loops. The built-in super basic programming language was genuinely advanced, featuring structured programming concepts ahead of its time. But the microdrives were unreliable, the keyboard felt horrible, and the operating system was so buggy that early machines shipped with a dongle containing fixes. Sinclair promised delivery for January 1984, but didn't fulfill orders until May. By then, the Apple Macintosh had launched and the IBM PC was conquering offices. The QL sold just 150,000 units before being discontinued in 1986. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, 1980s, Binatone tried to crack the video game market with their TV Master series. These were essentially Pong clones in various plastic shells, arriving just as the market was moving toward cartridge-based systems. The TV Master MK4, launched in 1980, offered 4 variations of Pong. Meanwhile, the Atari 2600 offered hundreds of different games. Binatone's gaming ambitions died faster than you could say Space Invaders. This might seem out of place among the technology, but Lymeswold represents innovation failure perfectly. Launched in 1982 by the Milk Marketing Board, this soft blue cheese was meant to rival French Brie and Danish Blue. They spent millions on marketing, creating massive demand the producers couldn't meet. When it finally reached shops, quality control was disastrous. Some batches were perfect, others were essentially expensive food poisoning. The cheese developed a reputation for being either underripe and chalky or overripe and ammonia-scented. Production ceased in 1992, though the name lives on as rhyming slang for old among cheese enthusiasts. The Inmos Transputer, Britain's microprocessor dream that got lost in translation. The Inmos Transputer was Britain's ambitious attempt to revolutionize computing with a radical new microprocessor, launched in 1985 with £50 million of government backing. This wasn't just another chip, it was designed for parallel processing, allowing multiple transputers to work together seamlessly, decades before this became mainstream. The technology was genuinely brilliant. Each transputer had built-in memory and communication links that could connect directly to other transputers without complex circuitry. You could chain hundreds together to create supercomputers from relatively cheap components. Atari even used them in prototype game consoles. Here's what nobody mentions. The transputer's architecture influenced modern multi-core processors we use today. But brilliant technology doesn't guarantee success. Programming required learning an entirely new language called Occam. British companies were slow to adopt it, Americans didn't trust it, and by the time people understood its potential, conventional processors had caught up while being far easier to program. Inmos was sold to S.G.S. Thompson in 1989 for a fraction of its investment. The cruel irony? Modern graphics cards use parallel processing remarkably similar to what the transputer pioneered. We just needed 20 years for the world to catch up. Goblin Teasmade had been around since the 1930s, but their 1980s relaunch attempted to modernize the automatic tea-making alarm clock for the microchip age. The new models featured digital clocks, radio alarms, and sleeker designs. They still featured the fundamental problem of having a boiling kettle next to your head while you slept. The 1980s models suffered from complicated programming, unreliable electronics, and the unchangeable fact that tea made from water that's been sitting in a plastic container all night tastes awful. Sales plummeted from 400,000 annually in the 1970s to virtually nothing by 1985. The Filofax organizer peaked in the mid-1980s as the ultimate yuppie accessory. While initially successful, the company failed to recognize the digital revolution coming. They stuck to leather and paper while Sharp and Casio developed electronic organizers. By the 1990s, the Filofax had gone from boardroom essential to car boot sale staple. The irony is that Filofax's modular approach, customize your organizer with different inserts, predated smartphone apps by decades. They just forgot to go digital when it mattered. Pevco's home sunbeds seemed brilliant in 1983. Get a tan without leaving Birmingham. These facial tanning lamps promised safe, controlled exposure to UV rays. What they delivered was uneven tans, occasional burns, and by decade's end, skin cancer scares that killed the market entirely. The devices were often used incorrectly, with no regulation on UV output. One model was recalled after users reported blistering. The home tanning market collapsed faster than you could say malignant melanoma. In 1986, the BBC created a digital successor to the Domesday Book for its 900th anniversary. Using special LaserDiscs readable only by modified BBC master computers, it contained maps, video, photos and data about 1980s Britain. Over 1 million people contributed content. Within 10 years, it was virtually inaccessible. The specialized hardware broke down and no migration plan existed. The original Domesday Book from 1086? Still perfectly readable. The digital version required a massive restoration project in 2002 just to access the data. It's the perfect metaphor for digital preservation challenges. Alan Sugar's Amstrad launched the PenPad PDA 600 in 1993, a touchscreen personal digital assistant years before Palm Pilot succeeded. It featured handwriting recognition, a diary, calculator, and address book. It was visionary and terrible simultaneously. The handwriting recognition barely worked, requiring you to write in a specific style. The screen was hard to see in anything but perfect lighting. Battery life was measured in hours. At £299, it was expensive enough that buyers expected it to actually work. It didn't, and Amstrad killed it within a year. Dixon's house brand, Prinz cameras tried competing with Japanese imports through the 1980s. They were usually rebadged products from various manufacturers, offering similar features for less money. The problem? They were universally inferior, with plastic lenses, unreliable mechanisms, and the photographic quality of a potato. The Prinz brand became synonymous with disappointment, the camera you got when your parents couldn't afford a proper Canon. Dixon's finally killed the brand in the late 1980s, accepting that competing with Japanese optical engineering was impossible. Amstrad's attempt to enter high-end audio in 1982 was like McDonald's launching a fine dining restaurant. The Fidelity range featured separate components with impressive specifications on paper. In reality, they used cheap components, thin metal cases that resonated, and circuits that introduced more noise than a pneumatic drill. Audiophiles laughed, mainstream consumers bought Japanese instead, and Amstrad retreated to making cheap all-in-one systems. The Fidelity range proved that you couldn't just stick wood effect vinyl on a box and call it high-end. A portable computer with a wireless infrared keyboard. It was also 28 pounds of groundbreaking, making portable a relative term. The infrared keyboard needed line of sight to work and failed in bright sunlight. The built-in screen was tiny. The price was huge, £3,000, and despite innovative features like a built-in modem, it couldn't compete with genuinely portable computers arriving from America. It's ICL's One Per Desk, launched in 1984 and also marketed as the BT Merlin Tonto and Telecom Australia's computer phone, was perhaps the most forward-thinking failure of them all. This was essentially a Sinclair QL, with a telephone handset grafted onto one end of the keyboard, offering what we'd now call computer telephony integration decades before Skype existed. The machine combined computing, telecommunications, and database management in one device. It could store contacts, dial numbers automatically, and even had rudimentary voicemail capabilities. The system included 2 built-in microdrives inheriting all the QL's reliability issues, could connect to Prestel, and featured software for word processing and spreadsheets. Here's what nobody talks about. Certain divisions of the UK Customs and Excise Department actually used these machines successfully for years, as did several insurance companies who appreciated the integrated approach. But at over £2,000, it was eye-wateringly expensive for something that looked like a computer had mated with a telephone. The hybrid nature confused consumers. Was it a computer with phone features or a phone with computer features? The answer was both and neither, which is marketing death. Most businesses couldn't understand why they'd want their computer and telephone combined, a concept that seems quaint now when we all carry computers that happen to make phone calls. The microdrives remained as unreliable as ever, the keyboard was the same terrible QL design, and the telephone integration, while innovative, was clunky in practice. ICL quietly discontinued it in 1986, though some units remained in service well into the 1990s in specific applications where the integration actually made sense. These 21 spectacular failures prove British 1980s innovation was brilliantly bonkers. From Sinclair's death-tricycle to ICL's phone-computer lovechild, each disaster pioneered technologies we now take for granted. Electric vehicles, satellite TV, digital communications, all started with these magnificent flops. They taught invaluable lessons. Superior technology doesn't guarantee success. Timing beats innovation, and never ever launch electric vehicles in a British winter. These weren't just failures, they were expensive education in how not to change the world. Hit subscribe for more tales of ambition crashing into reality.